Hi everybody, this is the InWin A5. It's a compact mid-tower PC case that can hold up to e-atx motherboards. Available in white or black, one of the first things you'll notice is the solid front panel. So where does the case intake air? The A5 uses a chimney style design for airflow. Fans at the bottom of the case bring in cool air, and fans at the top and rear remove the hot air. In today's video, I'll see if in addition to looking sleek, the A5 also makes a good home for your PC components. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. If you're unfamiliar with InWin, here's a crash course. The company formed in 1985 in Taiwan and is best known for its creativity and willingness to experiment, having produced some of the most unique and expensive PC cases I've ever seen. This isn't to say InWin only designs avant-garde cases for the wealthy. They have products for everyone, with designs ranging from the familiar black boxes we all know to elegant art pieces. And of course, the prices reflect this, with budget boxes for under $100 to tear-inducing and wallet-murdering cases costing $900 or even more. InWin prides itself on its innovation, and you can see this every time they showcase new offerings at CES or Computex. From the Dubility case, which can be user-assembled, to the 216 and F5, both of which incorporate wood elements, to the budget-oriented POC lineup, which is user-assembled and comes in a variety of colors. InWin's cases are functional but also bring an aesthetic not always seen in this sector of the PC market. InWin doesn't just create cases either. They also make and sell fans, power supplies, and all-in-one CPU coolers. InWin's main drive, as stated on their site, is to make products that fuse aesthetics and functionality through innovative design and engineering. The company has also stated they want to provide people with a solid experience throughout the customer journey. Finally, InWin is cognizant of their environmental impact and is embracing more environmentally friendly practices. So what's with all this company background information? Am I secretly an InWin shill? Nope. I wanted to look deeper into InWin to see if the company's guiding principles of creative design and good user experience was excellently executed in the A5, or if the case was just another jobber that's all flair and no substance. To do this, I'll cover the A5's features. After all, a case can look good all at once, but if it's lacking in functionality, then it's just a pig with lipstick. I'll also be building in the case to see how easy it is, and finally, I'll put the build through its paces to see whether or not the chimney design allows temperatures to remain relatively cool, or if the A5 is a bona fide furnace. I set up timestamps in the video, so feel free to watch at your own pace, or hop around, or pet a mule and kitten. Yes, kitty, thank you. I guess we have a little furry guest for our next portion here. But first, disclaimer time. After reaching out to InWin in an attempt to make contacts with the company, I was sent a box which not only included the A5 case, but also 650 watt power supply and an AIO liquid cooler, the latter of which I'll be using in today's build. While InWin did send me these items for free, I have not been paid to make this video, neither is my cat, and InWin does not get to see it prior to me pushing it live to YouTube. All my thoughts on the InWin A5 PC case conveyed in this video are my own and have been influenced only by my experience. Now meow with the show. Originally released in February of 2023, at the time of this video you can buy the InWin A5 for around $100 to $110. This price puts the enclosure in what I'd consider the lower to middle end of the very competitive mid-range case space, and as such ought to turn some eyes for those looking to get a nice looking PC case without spending too much money. If you're wondering, I consider mid-range case pricing to start around the $85 to $90 mark with a max of around $150. This is completely subjective on my part, of course, so if you have a different idea of what low, mid, and high-end PC cases and their respective price ranges are, let me know in the comments below. The A5 comes shipped in your typical brown box with hard foam for protection and is covered in a plastic bag. You'll find the accessories packed in a resealable plastic bag, and included are 3 one-use bags of screws that have extra standoffs, a standoff socket, hexagon head screws for your motherboard, and screws for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch hard drives. Also included are zip ties, 500mm fan and ARGB extension cables, a GPU support holder, and finally a card with a QR code to the user manual. I would have liked to have seen the case packed with that squishier kind of foam, which offers better protection, and better yet, I'd like to have seen InWin use some kind of biodegradable packing solution. As it stands, this hard foam is molded EPS, and once it hits the landfill, it'll be there for 500 years, and the squishy polyethylene takes 450 years to degrade. With regards to the manual, what's good about having it online only is any errors can be updated. What I dislike about it being online is my phone screen is often smaller than a page in a physical manual. Having said that, the online manual is in color, and while fairly thorough, it still has some drawbacks. It covers what's included with the case, provides all the information about the case structure, and features, and has an installation guide. It even speaks to the A5 story, which is one of a case evolving from a mini ITX enclosure in the A1 to an mATX and then ATX mid-tower in the A3 and A5. I do appreciate the resealable bag for any unused screws, but I would have liked to have seen the one-use bags be made of paper or some other recyclable or biodegradable material. The zip ties are also the one and done kind, and while I do personally use these for cable management, it doesn't speak to InWin's desire to be more environmentally friendly. So my suggestion here would be to include reusable Velcro cable ties instead. As for the extras, I definitely appreciate the 2 cable extensions and the GPU support holder. They were an unexpected surprise. As for construction and size, the A5 is made from steel and plastic and is deceptively small and light considering the PC components you can put inside. The case measures 399 by 215 by 407 millimeters or 15.7 inches by 8.5 by 16 inches. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can buy the A5 in black or white. However, the white version is more of a combination of the 2 colors. The exterior and interior panels are white, but the top panel, the PSU side panel, and other trim are black. The front panel cables are also black, so you may want to refrain from a white motherboard if that bothers you. The white paint is bright and has a rough texture to it as well. The tempered glass and back side panels are fastened to the case using InWin's patented mounting method. It's a toolless design, so to remove the panels, you simply pull outward from the top. This lack of screws gives the A5 a more elegant look and premium feel to it, which I definitely appreciate. The tempered glass side panel is 3 millimeters thick and is heavily tinted, so if you want to show off your components, you'll want some bright lighting inside. There is a black border strip at the top and bottom of the glass, which serves to hide the mounting strips affixed to the glass at these points. One benefit of such a dark tint is the A5 would make for a great front office PC, or if you don't want to make too much of a show of your PC's innards while still keeping the sleek glass aesthetic. One thing that definitely caught my eye is the ventilation where you'll mount your fans. The A5 is not restrictive at all when it comes to intaking or exhausting air, and this is great to see. The front panel is a solid metal piece and is not removable. Near the top, you'll find a silver mirror-finished InWin logo. In an effort to maintain design cohesion, the logo possibly could have been gold to match the accent strip on the top panel, but I don't mind the color difference. Overall, the A5 doesn't go out of its way to advertise itself with large logos, words, or pointless marketing phrases. As with the toolless side panels, the stark design gives that sense of elegance I previously mentioned, which may attract prospective buyers. As for the front I/O, you'll find a combo power and hard disk drive activity LED, a power button that has a satisfying clicky sound when pressed, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports with a max transfer speeds of up to 5 gigabits per second, an HD audio combo mic and headphone jack, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 Type-C port, which has max transfer speeds of up to 20 gigabits per second. It's great to see the port on the case that's less than 110 bucks. The A5 has 2 dust filters. The first is integrated into the top panel. You can remove the panel by sliding it out sideways towards the glass panel side. The top panel design is sleek with angled lines and a gold accent strip. The filter itself is not very dense, which should allow for plenty of airflow for exhaust fans, but still fine enough to keep larger dust and hair particles out when the computer is asleep or off. Unfortunately, this filter is not removable as it's glued to the plastic panel. Having it be removable would have been a nice bonus and would allow for even better airflow out of the top. I don't really see the point of needing the filter when the top fans will almost always be used as exhaust, and making it removable gives the customer options, providing a better experience. It's something I'd definitely like to see in a future version of the A5 if InWin continues with this product line. The other dust filter is at the bottom of the case, is inset into a plastic frame, and is removable from the front of the case. This is a nice touch as often bottom filters are removable from the back, and if a PC is placed against a wall, access to this filter can be difficult. The bottom filter also has that same density as the top filter, which I feel is another misstep by InWin. Since the A5 is using a chimney approach of bottom to top airflow, I think I'd want the bottom filter to be a bit finer so it's better at keeping dust, hair, pet dander, and other nasty particles from infiltrating their way into the case. Having said that, I realize a finer filter would also introduce more air restriction, so perhaps the density InWin chose is a compromise. While not a deal breaker, should you get the A5 or have a case with a similar density air filter, I recommend cleaning it and your case often. The A5's feet raise the case roughly 1 inch or 2.54 centimeters off the ground. This is high enough for me to fit part of my hand under the case, but I think I'd like to see the height increase by around maybe a quarter of an inch, so air can have an even easier time entering it. Flipping the case on its side reveals the feet are actually 2 pieces of continuous plastic running the length of each side of the case. Rubber blocks inserted into the feet help to keep your case from sliding, dampen any vibrations, and will help prevent any scratches to your desk. To remove the case feet, you'll need to take the rubber inserts out to get to the Phillips head screws behind them, which attach the feet to the case. I use a small flathead screwdriver to do this. Do note, you do have to remove one of the feet to install the rear bottom-mounted fan. While this is a minor inconvenience, InWin at least made it easy to accomplish. When it comes to motherboard support in the A5, you can install ITX, MATX, ATX, and even e-atx motherboards up to 12 by 11 inches or 304 by 279 millimeters. The motherboard tray has a large cutout as well, so you'll have access to the CPU bracket when the motherboard is mounted. Instead of standoffs, the A5 has these nipple outdents on the motherboard tray. Having said that, there are still 2 pre-installed standoffs, which have those nubbins that let you install a motherboard while the case is vertical. Should you go with an ITX, MATX, or non-standard ATX motherboard, there are 2 extra standoffs and holes for you to place them. If you go the MATX or ITX route, you may need to remove and reposition the 2 pre-installed standoffs. If you need to add, remove, or shuffle around any standoffs, be sure you don't screw them in too tight when reinstalling, or you'll run the risk of stripping them, which makes motherboard removal a massive pain. Unfortunately, the manual doesn't cover installation for the various motherboard sizes, and I feel this is an oversight on InWin's part. You should be alright with the default layout for most MATX and ATX motherboards, but definitely be careful when test fitting components, as you don't want to scratch any traces on the motherboard's back. If your motherboard has an extra hole not covered by the outdents or pre-installed standoffs, make use of those extra standoffs if there's a corresponding installation point. You can fit up to 4 storage devices in the A5. 2 of the 4 mounting positions can hold 3.5-inch drives, while all 4 spots can hold a 2.5-inch drive. 3 drives can be installed on the back of the case, and 1 can be installed at the bottom front of the case. To install drives on the back, you'll need to remove the sleds and screw the drives in. On the white version of the case, these sleds are black. As for the front drive, you'll screw that in from the bottom of the case. Unfortunately, installation is not toolless for any of the mounting locations, nor does there seem to be any kind of foam or rubber vibration dampening bits for mechanical drives. I think I would have liked to have seen some kind of push-peg toolless installation method, at least for 2.5-inch drives. You can install GPUs up to 340 millimeters in length into the A5. However, if your power supply is longer than 170 millimeters, you'll only be able to fit GPUs that are 280 millimeters or shorter. When putting together parts for a new PC, or if you're just upgrading the home for your existing parts, definitely check the lengths of your GPU and PSU so you don't run into any compatibility issues. Also of note, the case has 2 reusable PCIe slot covers, and the remaining 5 are the one and done kind. This is definitely disappointing to see in a $100 case. As for CPU coolers, you'll have a max height compatibility of 162 millimeters, which means the Vetru V5 at 148 millimeters, the Thermalright Peerless Assassin at 155 millimeters, and the Cooler Master Hyper 212 at 159 millimeters will all fit. Want to use an AIO liquid cooler to keep your CPU temps down? You'll be able to install a 240 millimeter solution and mount it at the top of the case. Power supplies up to 200 millimeters in length will fit in the A5. To install your PSU, you'll insert it at the front and top of the case with the intake fan facing the CPU. While there are 4 screw points for the PSU, you'll want to make use of the PSU support holder, which is attached to the removable side panel. You can slide it up and down to make adjustments depending on the length of your PSU. Due to the A5's unconventional layout and size, you'll be restricted to using 120 millimeter fans only. You can install 2 at the bottom, 2 at the top, and 1 in the rear. The A5 comes with one InWin Mercury AM120S ARGB fan pre-installed at the rear. It's a slimmer fan measuring only 20 millimeters thick instead of the standard 25 millimeters. But you shouldn't have a problem installing standard thickness fans in any of the mounting locations. As for optimal orientation, InWin suggests you have the bottom fans be intake and then the rear and top fans be exhaust. Keep in mind this will create negative air pressure, so your case might get dusty faster. To achieve positive pressure, you could position the rear fan as intake and have the only exhaust be your top fans and PSU. I'll definitely test this configuration to see if the temperatures get better, worse, or stay the same. You could also achieve positive pressure by adjusting your fan speeds so the bottom fans run at higher RPMs than the rest. If you want to liquid cool your PC with a custom loop, you'll find the A5 rather restrictive. However, you could get creative and still possibly do it. If you use slim radiators, you can install a 240 millimeter rad up top, possibly one at the bottom, and then attach a 120 millimeter pump res combo at the rear. You might have to modify the case a bit to get everything to fit, but again, if you're determined to do it, you just might succeed. If you love making sure all your cables are well managed and tucked neatly away, doing so in the A5 might prove difficult. There are no cable grommets and you won't find very many cable tie-down points. While there are some next to the storage sleds, accessing these when drives are installed doesn't look easy. There is a generous smattering of cable routing holes spread around the bottom, side, and top of the motherboard tray, so at least cable routing should be easy. With regards to being able to stuff cables into the back, there's about 1 1/8 of an inch or 2.86 centimeters of clearance from the motherboard tray to the back of the case. Based on the anemic cable management features, along with the atypical PSU installation orientation, it'll be interesting to see how well I can cable manage a PC build in the A5. Speaking of PC build, here are the parts I'll be using with the A5. Powering this PC will be an AMD Ryzen 5 7600X. It's a 6-core 12-thread CPU. It's a price to performance CPU, and it or the non-X variant would be a great choice for any budget builder. Cooling it is the InWin MR240 liquid cooler, which InWin sent me along with the A5. It's a 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler, and instead of using an Asetuck pump design, the MR240's pump is housed in the radiator. It also comes with 2 ARGB fans. The motherboard I'll be using is the ASRock B650 Live Mixer. I made a review video on this motherboard, and I'm excited to use it. The Live Mixer is a colorful and packed board with 3 M.2 slots, a slew of USB ports on the rear, and other features. For RAM, I'll be using this DDR5 kit from 𝐬𝐧𝐧𝐞. It's 32GB and has a cache latency of 6800 and has RGB lighting. To house the OS and programs, I'm using the P5 Plus and P3 Plus NVMe drives from Crucial. Both are 1TB in capacity and are PCIe 4.0. The P5 Plus uses TLC chips and has a DRAM cache, while the P3 Plus does not and uses QLC memory chips instead. To help keep the PC cool, I'll be using a 3-pack of PWM ARGB fans from Thermalright. These are super affordable and perform well to boot. I'll replace the rear exhaust fan that came with the A5 for one of the Thermalright fans and use them in conjunction with the 2 fans that come with the MR240 AIO. Powering the system is the 750 GT from EVGA. It's a 750 watt 80 plus gold PSU. I was going to use the 650 watt PSU InWin sent me, but because of the GPU I'm using, I wanted the extra 100 watts for peace of mind. I'll use the InWin PSU in a future PC build, so definitely get subscribed so you don't miss out. Finally, the GPU I'm using is the RTX 3070 Gaming X Trio from MSI. While it is last gen, the 3070 still performs well, and you can find them on eBay for relatively cheap. This GPU will conquer games at both 1080p and 1440p resolutions, no problem. Been a week, I've gotten a haircut, and here's the PC all put together in the A5. I've also completed some benchmarking and gameplay to see how hot and how loud the build got in the A5. While this case does have an unorthodox layout compared to other cases I built in, assembly wasn't as fear-inducing as I thought it would be. Additionally, the heavy tinted glass panel doesn't obscure the RGB lighting as much as I thought it would. Overall, I think the PC looks really good. The ASRock Live Mixer's loud design contrasts nicely with the A5's more grown-up looks, and the RGB from the various parts adds some flair without being too in your face, especially when the glass panel's on. Having said that, building in the A5 wasn't incident-free. My concerns regarding tight spaces and cable management were definitely warranted. Wrangling the cables didn't prove terribly too difficult, but could have been easier, especially when pushing them through the A5's tiny cable routing holes. I also had to remove the radiator from the top at least 3 times to snake fan or PSU cables through the tiny holes, and I had to remove the GPU to reconnect bottom cables I had unplugged for rerouting purposes. I would have liked more cable tie-down points, especially at the back of the case, to better route the EPS and top fan cables. One thing that definitely annoyed me is losing the use of one of the hard drive sleds because I used a tie-down point. Eliminating the use of a storage spot is not a good thing. Ultimately though, I don't think I did too bad of a job organizing all the cables. The front is clean and the back is fairly organized. Both side panels close easily and there's nothing pushing against them. As for other components, installing the motherboard and bottom fans went without a hitch. I did have to install an additional standoff as ASRock motherboards seemed to have an extra hole, but it was easy. Removing one of the case feet to install a bottom fan was also painless. While there were some hiccups, building in the A5 went as well as many of the other PCs I've built in the last few years, which is to say easy enough, but with some issues mostly of my own making and not necessarily the product's fault. If you're going to use the A5, you'll definitely want to pre-plan before you start, especially with regards to where cables will go. Here are some tips that might save you some time and stress both for building in the A5 and building PCs in general. First, get a modular power supply. This way you only need to plug in the cables you need and you won't have to worry about filling up all of the space behind the PSU plate as you stuff excess cables there. I installed 2 EPS CPU power cables, the 24-pin motherboard cable, 2 GPU cables, and a SATA cable just in case I needed it for storage or control boxes in the future. Because I'm not using the SATA cable, I folded it up and used Velcro cable ties to cinch it together. I also invested in 18-gauge cable extensions from 𝐲𝐬𝐺 to make GPU cable routing easier. They're more flexible than the stock 𝐕GA cables, which let me better route the cables and avoid running into clearance issues preventing me from closing the glass side panel. I also didn't have to deal with the ugly pigtails the stock cables have. While I would have liked to have used the 24-pin cable extension, I couldn't due to tight routing constraints in the A5. I also didn't use the EPS extensions for the CPU power since this area is fairly obscured from view and I didn't want to overload the already small space behind the motherboard tray with more cables. Secondly, map out where all the cables for your build need to go ahead of time and pre-route as many cables as you can before installing your motherboard, case fans, or the CPU cooler, regardless if it's an all-in-one liquid cooler like the InWin MR24 for this build, or a tower cooler. Definitely pre-plug the EPS cables into the CPU power connectors on your motherboard before installing it into the case. Also plug in cables that go on the bottom of your motherboard before you install the bottom fans or your GPU. And be sure to route them properly at the back of the case so you don't have to later unplug and reroute them again. Finally, before you even buy this case, or really any case for that matter, double check not just the length of your GPU, but the width as well. Just as you might run into issues if your GPU is too long, if it's too wide, you might run into clearance issues with regards to getting the side panel back on after you've plugged in the power connectors. The MSI RTX 3070 Gaming X Trio is not just a long and thick card, it's also wide. And because of this, the stock PSU cables stick out pretty far. Because they're also very stiff, I couldn't get a tight enough bend to reinstall the glass panel without issue. However, if I used a smaller GPU like my EVGA RTX 3070 XC Black, a much narrower GPU, even though it's essentially the same card, I wouldn't have had this issue, nor needed the cable extensions. Moving on to temperatures and noise, during benchmarks and gaming, the InWin MR24AIO CPU cooler did an admirable job keeping temperatures in check for the 7600X. I used the fan control app, a free piece of software, to set up various fan profiles for the 5 case fans. I could even control the GPU fans and AIO pump if I wanted to, but I left the pump at a steady RPM rate of around 2700 or 50% and left the GPU to its own devices by leaving the fans on auto. I performed 2 rounds of 6 benchmark runs using the same fan settings, once for just the CPU and then again for both the CPU and GPU at the same time. The second round was the same set of tests but with the rear fan as intake instead of exhaust. Between each run, I let the CPU and GPU cool down for about 10 minutes or so. Ambient temperatures over the course of testing ranged from 71 to 74 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 to 23 degrees Celsius. At idle, the CPU hovered around 39 to 43 degrees Celsius, while the GPU and GPU hotspot were around 28.8 and 39.5 degrees respectively. Do note AMD Expo and PBO is enabled in this build, which could contribute to higher idle temperatures for the CPU. I used Cinebench R23 and for Mark II, aka the fuzzy donut test, to stress the CPU and GPU. While they do hit both components with loads rather hard, they are not reflective of real-world use like gaming, watching videos, browsing the internet, or making spreadsheets. To reflect a more realistic use case that would also utilize the CPU and GPU, I played Counter-Strike 2 and Cyberpunk 2077. I used the default settings for the former and medium settings for the latter. Swapping the rear fan from exhaust to intake proved interesting. CPU temps did improve, but only when the GPU was being hit hard. The CPU temps swung lower or higher by about 1 to 2 degrees depending on fan speeds. However, the bigger difference was with the GPU. Temps for it were 4 to 6 degrees hotter with the rear fan as intake. Ultimately, I think keeping the rear fan as exhaust is the way to go, with this case at least, as this will provide the best mix of cooling for both the CPU and GPU. For real-world cases such as gaming, temperatures were much better. while playing Counter-Strike 2, the CPU maxed out at 78.9 degrees and the GPU hit 59 degrees, and 71.5 for the hotspot. In Cyberpunk, the CPU reached 73.8 degrees, while the GPU maxed out at 65 and 78 degrees for the hotspot. It's interesting the CPU temperatures in Counter-Strike were higher than in Cyberpunk, but maybe this can be chalked up to CS2 being a more CPU-intensive game. In addition to temperature, I also wanted to gauge how loud the PC got. Using my fancy new dB meter, I positioned it about 2.5 feet or 81 centimeters away from the case to mirror my position at the keyboard. I will say my house is fairly loud, what with all the pets milling about inside and songbirds doing their thing outside. You can achieve a quiet experience with the PC build in the A5, especially when doing normal everyday things like browsing the internet or watching a video. However, when fan speeds ramp up above 50%, the noise does get louder. To illustrate that point, here's what it sounds like with all the case fans at 40%, 50%, and 80% speeds. I barely ever noticed the GPU fans as they ran quietly at either 0 or around 1000 RPMs. The MR24 pump running at 50% or around 2700 RPMs was also fairly quiet. However, if the pump runs faster, it gets rather loud and starts to vibrate. Overall, I found the noise levels in the A5 to be decent. The InWin A5 is an interesting case. It looks great, isn't too expensive, has a good amount of storage options, and has enough features to make almost any user happy. I appreciate the presence of a USB 3.2 2x2 front panel connector and ease of use when it comes to the bottom dust filter. I love that the front panel connector for the power button and light is one solid connector instead of being split up like we normally see. I like the toolless design for both side panels, which gives the case a more seamless look and premium feel. I like that the front panel connectors are flat for easier management. The USB 3.2 Gen 1 connector especially is not only flat, but the connector part itself is less bulky than normal connectors found in almost every case I've encountered, which makes routing it much easier. One quality of life feature I absolutely love are the little clips InWin put on the RGB connectors, so they don't accidentally disconnect. Other companies need to implement this feature into the RGB cables they use, especially if they're the standard 3 or 4 pin ones. Finally, assembling the PC in the A5 really wasn't all that difficult. While I don't think this case is for beginners, building in it wasn't so hard as to be a massive barrier or a killer of joy. Having said all that, it's not all roses with the InWin A5. There are areas where this case fell short and could improve. The dust filter in the top panel could be removable, as this would allow for even better exhaust airflow. Any filter, no matter how porous, adds a layer of restriction, and it's no different here. Hard drive installation needs to be toolless, at least for 2.5-inch SSDs, and there needs to be vibration dampening support for spinning drives. Cable management holes need to be slightly larger to accommodate multiple cables being passed through the same hole, and tie-down points should be more plentiful, easier to access, and not interfere with reinstalling any of the rear storage sleds. I don't mind the lack of grommets in the A5, but give me the tools to better manage my cables. The user manual needs revising. Plain and simple. The installation instructions could better attend to installing motherboards of different sizes, and the manual could provide better instructions for installing hard drives, front panel cables, and the power supply. Also, the pictures used in the A5 manual are actually for the A3, while similar, is an 𝐴𝐷x case. My point about the pictures might be more of a nitpick than the rest of the issues, but the manual, which is entirely digital and thus easy to revise, should better communicate building a PC in the A5. What I consider the most egregious sin with this case are the presence of the one-and-done PCIe slot covers. As I already said, a case that costs over $100 should not be using these. Additionally, their presence goes against InWin's commitment to the environment, as they are not reusable. Speaking of, I'd like to see better packaging materials used with the A5. Instead of EPS foam, consider using green cell foam or some other biodegradable packing material that will still protect the case during transit. Additionally, instead of one-use plastic bags for screws, use paper pouches, cardboard boxes, or even envelopes. I don't want to be overly critical in this regard, since InWin is hardly the only company still relying on bad packing materials, but I do want to bring it up. After all, if these things aren't called out, and if solutions aren't mentioned, How will change ever come about? Despite these drawbacks, the A5 is a good case, and the end results of using it are a sweet looking PC that doesn't get too loud or hot. As such, I can definitely recommend the A5 from InWin if you don't take the price into account. You may want to peruse other cases priced around $100 or so, especially if the A5 is not your cup of tea in terms of style or how you'd install your components. The case market is a crowded one, and the $100 price point is even more crowded. So yes, give the A5 a look, but be a good consumer and compare it to other offerings out there that cost as much or less as this case. And that's all I have to say about the InWin A5 mid-tower PC case. What do you think about it? What cases have recently caught your eye? Let me know in the comments section. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hit that like button if you liked the video or at least found it helpful. Feel free to share any questions or comments you have down below. Show your support for the channel by clicking subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any future content. And hey, while you're here, why not stick around and watch some of the other videos I've made. I'm Seth, and I'll see you next time in the middle of nowhere.